35-foot-long canoe. Canadian trappers used to make the trip from Montreal to Fort Michela, Mackinac in that. They got paid $25 to $50 per trip. This is Fort Michela, Mackinac. Good-sized fort. These are military punishment devices. Evidently, if you screwed up and did something wrong, you got to put in the stocks. Mom and Dad. Whoop, Nancy walked into my camera. Put the children in the stocks. That's where they deserve to be.
You put locks on them?
Just lock them up and keep them in there.
Stay there, guys. Stay there. I can get out, though, see?
Oh, Mom and Kira are in too.
Did you get a still picture?
We're inside the fort now, picking food out of the garden.
Wait.
Trying to get you somewhat of a shot around the inside of the fort.
You were going to bring cannonball. What's your name? Chris? Yep, they said Chris will have the cannonball for the firing of the cannon.
Oh, come on.
Uh-oh. Folks, Chris forgot the cannonball.
Yeah.
Oh no, well I guess we'll have to do the best we can without it. You didn't bring it either? I didn't. See, Chris was supposed to bring the cannonball, that's what we heard. Oh well. Folks, the cannon I'm going to fire for you here is called a half-pounder. The reason it's called a half-pounder fires out a half-pound cannonball. It's solid cast iron, about the size of a golf ball. They have 4 cannons of this size here at the fort, plus a couple larger sized ones. They all have the same firing range, 1 mile. You can see a larger one up there. That's a 6-pounder in the Bastion. 1 mile firing range for any of these weapons here. That's about a fifth of the way across the straits. They didn't have one that could reach the other side. Now, there wasn't much military action here at the fort, so the main reason they'd fire them off was for ceremonial purposes. The firemen salute to some dignitary arriving at the fort, or maybe just to impress the Indians. In fact, there is a story of an Indian chief named Wabasha who had a most unusual request. That was, when he was to arrive at the fort, he wanted a live cannonball fired over his canoe. Because oddly enough, Wabasha liked to stand up in his canoe, take his canoe paddle, and swat at that cannonball as it flew by. Not sure if he ever connected, folks, but if he did, I bet you he was looking for a new canoe paddle the next morning. I'm going to load this for you now. First step we have in loading is to take a tool called the gunner's worm. With it I'll scrape out any debris that's in the barrel from the last firing. Then I have to take a wet swab, dip it in the bucket, get it a little wet. Run a wet swab down the barrel to extinguish any of the sparks you have left in there from the last firing. It's a very important step when loading and firing rapidly. And a dry swab is run down. That'll soak up the excess water and put it in there by the wet swab. And then they charge about a half a cup of black powder wrapped today in good old 18th century Reynolds wrap. Muslin back then, but this is a lot safer. And with the rammer, pack it securely to the rear of the barrel. Now normally that cannonball would go in next, but Chris forgot the cannonball on it, you know, what can we do? Oh well, we'll do what we can without it, Chris. Now we take a brass gunner's stick, and I'll pierce that charge to the rear of the barrel through the touch hole, then fuse the cannon with a finer grade of powder from a musket cartridge, pouring some down the vent, rounding it up on top of the cannon. The fuse is all set now and I'm ready to fire. Once again, folks, for your pictures, have those cameras ready. If you didn't jump inside and get your picture of the musket, believe me, you're going to get your picture of the cannon. It's much louder.
Mom, I told you to eat it! Mom, he's already got it here in the box. No, they're not going to put it in the barrel. But it'll explode just as if there wasn't.
Now that the port fire is lit, the gunner would have heard these commands. Gunner, make ready! Boys! Fire!
Thank you.
Tell them what this is for. It's for the prisoners.
Black hole for.
Let's see what the bad prisoners are.
That's if you were really bad, like Todd, you got put in there.
Oh, that's solitary confinement. No, you don't want to go. That's solitary confinement.
I believe it. This was the prison or the guardhouse. Not a very nice place to be.
I'm making a stool, just like the one right there. Oh. Just doing some decorative molding work at the moment. Let's see, how many people do we have from out of state? Good portion of you, so that means the rest of you are from Michigan, obviously. All right. Okay, what I'd like to do is just tell you a little bit about the fort, and especially about the British here at Michela Mackinac. Today I am dressed as a British soldier, that of the King's 8th Regiment of Foot, and they were stationed here last at Michela Mackinac. The French originally constructed the fort here in 1715. The reason they constructed it, the fur trade. It was very profitable in New France at that time. They needed a way of controlling it in the upper Great Lakes region. The only fort in the area at that time was at a place called Le Detroit. And Detroit is spelled D-E-T-R-O-I-T. It means the Straits in English. And yes, that's where Detroit comes from. So in 1715, they decided that this was a good location to build a fort. The British had been expanding out of the Hudson Bay region, so they built Fort Michela Mackinac, where Lake Michigan and Lake Huron come together. Now, the French held on to the fort for quite a good time, for about 45 years, but eventually the French military had to leave after they had lost the war to the British, known as the French and Indian War. So in 1761, the British military marched in to occupy Michela Mackinac. Since there weren't too many British citizens in the fort at that time, the Frenchmen pretty much carried on the fur trade instead of the British that would eventually come. Now the British soldiers back then, when they came here to Michela Mackinac, knew that this was the frontier and also very isolated. Now what happens to lakes in Michigan in the wintertime?
They freeze.
They freeze, yes. Back then there were no road routes, so the only way to get here would be by water. The major routes of the day were usually traveled by canoes. The more popular one, the Northern River route. A large birch bark canoe like the one you passed walking over here could hold 3 to 4 tons of cargo and a 10-man crew of voyageurs, and that's quite a bit. They would paddle here on that Northern River route, stop at Michela Mackinac before they would go out and stay all winter with the Indians trading the trade goods they brought along. So the main reason that the British were here at Michela Mackinac, at least the British military, was that they needed a way of just controlling the fur trade, keeping the Indians at peace so that the fur trade would prosper. Now the British soldiers here had a lot of chores they would take care of on a day-to-day basis. Things like chopping wood. It took about 17.5 cords of wood to keep a fireplace going for the average Mackinac winter. Anybody know how big a cord of wood is? 4 foot by 4 foot by 8 foot. Now multiply that times 17.5, double it because there were 2 fireplaces in the Soldiers Barracks, and then think of everybody else in the fort, all 800 permanent residents trying to get wood also. You're talking about quite an interesting prospect for getting wood for the barracks for the wintertime. The Soldiers Barracks was constructed in 1769. It housed about 73 soldiers, and at some times there were even the soldiers' wives that lived in the barracks with them. The British soldiers back then were paid 8 cents a day. They were also in the Army for life. You might want to think about that one just a minute. And they got to wear a nice bright red wool coat, which made a great target on the battlefield. The soldiers also had other daily routines. In the summertime, the sand dunes west of the fort would pile up, so they would have to shovel those away. And in the wintertime, the other extreme, the snowdrifts, would pile up very high against the palisade walls. They'd have to shovel those down too. And let's not forget guard duty. The soldiers had to walk that guard duty even on the coldest Mackinac nights, and I'm sure it did get quite cold walking the palisade wall. Now here at Michela, Mackinac, the American Revolution, believe it or not, had quite an effect on the fort and vice versa. There was a regiment stationed here called the 10th Regiment of Foot. Now they left here in 1774, bound for what they thought was home, England. Well, they didn't quite make it there. What happened is that they ended up being diverted to a small town called Boston. And at that time they were put on a march toward a smaller town called Lexington and another one called Concord in 1775. They took place in the first battle of the American Revolution. So there were actually some soldiers stationed here that were at that first battle. Also, two expeditions were mounted from Michela, Mackinac in 1779 and 1780. One was against the Americans. They sent some redcoats down to Fort St. Joseph with some militia and also Indian auxiliaries. They never did see any of the Americans. So they came back here about a month later. Another expedition was mounted in 1780. That went down to St. Louis to fight the Spanish. And they were severely defeated by the Spanish, and they eventually ended up coming back to Michela, Mackinac also. And even though that American Revolution was far off in the colonies, believe it or not, one of the reasons they moved the fort from here to Mackinac Island was because of that revolution. The Americans are getting very strong in the southern Great Lakes area. You may have heard of a general named George Rogers Clark. He was capturing forts left and right down south, so they figured that they needed a way to be able to be safe from the Americans if they tried a naval attack. They decided to move the fort to Mackinac Island. So they began to dismantle many of the buildings piece by piece during the winter months, slide them across the ice, set them up on Mackinac Island nice and high up on that bluff. American naval guns would not be able to elevate to shoot into the fort. They began to dismantle this one by actually taking apart many of the buildings, sliding them across the ice, and, well, anything they didn't take with them, they burned to the ground. That's why today Michela, Mackinac is a reconstruction and not the original fort. In 1959, the Mackinac Island State Park Commission, which is funded completely by admissions, began reconstructing. To date, we have one half of the reconstruction done and 2/3 of the archaeology, so we do have a little ways to go. The most recently reconstructed building, the Chevalier House over here in the corner of the fort, you can now go inside of there, downstairs, up into the powder magazine and see the original charred timbers that the British burned in 1781. Right next door, our archaeologists are working on the Ezekiel Solomon house. Ezekiel Solomon was the first Jewish settler in the state of Michigan. And when that house is reconstructed, it'll look something like the one we're standing next to now. The kind of architecture the French use is called couteau en terre, or post in the ground. They would dig a long trench in the ground, set a frame over the top. They then put posts into the ground, attach it to the frame, and pack clay around the outside. The roof is made of cedar bark. Not a very efficient building. Wood foundations rot easily, and the roof had to be patched or changed periodically. A typical British building, such as the Soldiers Barracks here, is a lot more efficient. Their foundations were built of stone, which did not rot out in the ground. They also notched or dovetailed the timbers on the corners, packed clay chinking in between each horizontal log, and made a roof of cedar shingles. And how'd you like to come in and help me make a shingle? If you want to, come right on in here. What's your name? Tara. Where are you from? Tara from Illinois. Where in Illinois, do you know? Near Chicago. Okay, good enough. Step right over here. Tara, you're going to help me make a shingle. Now, the first thing we're going to do is learn the names of the tools. That's called a froe. Okay? And this is called a maul. All right, now we'll place our froe on this piece of cedar. drive it down into the wood. And I'll tell you, I'll let you go ahead. Pretty good to me.
She's had practice.
Okay, now what are you going to do? Hit the ends. Hey. Say you made these before? I bet you play baseball or something, right? No? Your dad is a slave owner and you're a slave. Is that it? Almost. Okay. Okay, tell you what, I bet we can get the shingle. Now watch what happens when I push forward. You're pretty good at this, young lady, I must say. Okay, I'll tell you what, let's step right over here. We got nothing we're going to do yet. Wait, this is called a shaving horse or a draw horse. Now what we do is we shave off one end of it, clamp it down nice and tight, and then shave one end of it off. It's a dangerous tool to work with.
I can tell.
Your mother said never cut towards yourself. Very wise. I'll have to remember that. I'll have to say, a famous mother once said in the next talk, okay? But the whole idea is that when we thin one end of it off, the layer of that will go right up the top, and the next one will go right over the top of it. It'll be a nice flat roof. I'll tell you what, Tara. Whenever somebody comes into the saw pit to help me out, I give them some options before they complete. Your first option is to join the British Army. You get 8 cents a day. You're here for the rest of your life. No more McDonald's hamburgers or video games. What do you think? Nah, okay. Your next option is to climb on the roof of the Soldiers Barracks and nail these on as I make them. It'll only take you... well, there's only about 7,000 of them up there. What do you think? Okay, I'll tell you what. Since you came in and helped me out, you did most of the work. You can have that as a souvenir. How's that? And to give you an idea of how long it took to make a roof like the one on the Soldiers Barracks, when they moved the building to Mackinac Island during the American Revolution, they actually took the roof apart in sections, slid it across the ice, and then set it back on in sections over there. It's a lot easier than making a whole new roof. Now, if you'd like to have a seat on the parade ground benches, the Mackinac Militia is about to assemble.
He was talking about having 7,000 shingles on top of it. You see the British Union Jack flying over the top. This is the Soldiers Barracks.
Okay, so bend the line back here just a little bit. Guys, step back a little bit. There we go, that's good, that's good. Right here. Very good. Okay, now, we've got our militia all set here. Now what we need to do is learn how to stand at attention. Okay, so all good soldiers, to stand at attention, you put your heels together, stand nice and straight and tall, suck in your stomach, throw back your shoulders, stick out your chest, and look straight forward. And looking forward. Breathe. It's okay to breathe. Okay, all right, good, good. Good. Are we segregated here? Pretty close to it. Ladies on one end. Well, we got a couple ladies out here too, so. All right, looks good. Now, the next thing we got to do is see if you guys know your left from your right. So everybody raise your left hand. Your other left. That one. There you go. Your other left. There you go. Your right. Okay, and everybody keep your hands up there for half an hour. Just joking. Put them down. Okay, now what we need is a sergeant. Who wants to be sergeant? Okay, I think this guy right here with the property of the Bears, number 34. Who's number 34 in the Bears? Walter Payton. This man knows his football. Okay, good. Now, you're going to be a sergeant. What's your name? What's that? Bobby. What's your last name? We'll stick with Bobby. Okay, turn around. Turn around and face the troops here. Bobby, you're going to holler out the commands for me. So the first command you want to give them is... Okay, we're on the way now. Okay.
Forward march.
Forward march. Straight forward. We'll tell you when to stop. Okay, everybody wave goodbye. Isn't it amazing how that line gets bigger? It means turn around. Yeah. Yeah, this way. That's right. Okay.
Forward march.
Come on, come on, come on. Hurry up. That's right. Oh, who told you a cruise to turn around? You're supposed to be facing that way. Okay, now, we've got to turn back so they're facing this direction. How do you think we can do that? Now, be face to the left or face to the right. Which one do you think?
Right.
Now that's the other direction. Face to the left. There we go. Face this way. All right, looks pretty good. We may have a good body of soldiers here. Now, I tell you what, folks. We got just a little bit of a problem. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to keep them for a month. How does that sound? Okay, sounds good. And kids, you know what you get to eat for rations? A pound of salt pork and a cup of oatmeal. Sounds good, huh? We had a little girl that wanted Fruit Loops. Sorry, no Fruit Loops. Okay, tell you what, I have here a proclamation from the king. You know who the king is? Anybody know who the king is? We had one little girl that yelled out Elvis, but
King George.
you don't know who the king is. King George the
Third.
Very good. Sergeant knows his stuff here. Now what I want you to do, Sergeant, is I want you to hand one of those out as a proclamation from the king, mustering these guys into the Mackinac militia. While you're here at Michela, Mackinac, you might want to stop by and see our fur trader down here in the trader store. He has a 90-pound bale. You can pick one of those up and get an idea of how heavy it is. It's a known fact that the most common reason for retirement among the voyageurs was a hernia. So they did a lot of heavy lifting. Also, too, stop by and see the ladies in the priest's piquet house. They're cooking today. Stop by and see the blacksmith that's hard at work, and also the woodworker right here in the end of this row house. The sergeant's almost finished. Good, all right. Okay, you can sit down. Thank you very much, guys. All right, three main parts of each and every musket. I'll bet you've all heard of them before. There's an expression that goes along with them. There's the lock or firing mechanism, the wooden stock, and the metal barrel. And if I were to sell you this gun today, I'd sell it to you lock, stock, and barrel. All right. Another one you might be familiar with is don't go off half-cocked. The gun is now at the half-cock, and it will not fire. That's the safety. Before I could fire, I had to pull it to full cock. So don't go off half-cocked. If you do, the musket won't work. The way it does work is really very simple. This mechanism right here is called the hammer. In the jaws of the hammer is a piece of stone called the flint. When I pull the trigger, it'll fly forward and scrape against that piece of metal. What happens when flint hits steel?
Sparks.
Sparks. The sparks rain down in the now exposed charge of gunpowder here in the pan. Hopefully, it will ignite, creating a flame that will burn through an opening in the side of the barrel called the touch hole, sending off the main charge, pushing the musket ball on its way. Now, it sounds like a lengthy process, but it works very quickly. And on a good day, I could get my musket to work 8 or 9 times out of 10. On a rainy day, a lot less. In fact, another old expression, keep your powder dry. Very accurate. When gunpowder gets wet, it will not burn. And during the American Revolution, you could see the two armies out there fighting it away, and all of a sudden it would begin to rain. They'd have to postpone the battle to a sunnier, drier day. The armies could fire their muskets at each other. Now, to load the gun, a soldier would have used one of these. It's a paper cartridge. And the reason they use the paper cartridge, speed of loading. You could load this gun once every 15 seconds or 4 times a minute. Now, in those days, they had the more accurate rifle that had grooves cut in the barrel to put a spin on the ball, but a rifle took twice as long to load, once every 30 seconds. So really, the British Army gave up accuracy for speed of loading, but they had a philosophy. They figured if they lined them men up in long lines of men called ranks, 100 men in each firing 4 times a minute. Get a sheet of lead flying at the enemy 4 times a minute, we're bound to hit something. Now the soldier would rip the cartridge open with his teeth because that would be the quickest way to get to the powder in the heat of the battle. Which brings us to a physical requirement needed to join the Army. Each soldier had to have at least 4 teeth in his mouth. 2 in the top, 2 in the bottom, opposing each other to rip these cartridges open. So be careful. I see teeth, I see recruits. Sprinkle a little bit of powder in the pan as a climbing charge. Pull a prison cover over the top. The rest of the powder goes down the barrel as the main charge. Followed by that paper is wadding and normally the musket ball resting on the end of the cartridge, but it's not present for safety reasons. The whole thing is compacted at the bottom with, do I know what this is called?
No.
Ramrod.
No. Pardon? No, that's not it either. I heard somebody say it.
Push the powder down.
Pusher downer. The ramrod. That's it. The ramrod. We've had it called the pusher downer, the shover downer, the garbage compactor, all kinds of things. So we'll shove it to the bottom of the barrel, and the musket is all ready to fire. Now, if you'd like to take a picture of the actual firing of the musket, rest your finger lightly on the shutter button. Back and relax, because when and if the musket goes off, I can almost guarantee you're going to flinch and take that picture out of sheer fright. If you have any small children, you may want to cover their ears. If you have a hearing aid, you may want to turn it down. Be extra careful. I've seen some great pictures of the red ensign on top of the flagpole.
What is he going to try to shoot, man? He's going to shoot them.
And they would have fired in those long lines of men called ranks. You can see the ranks are just a bit thin today. They would have fired to these commands. Full cock your fire alarm. Present. Fire. Big bang. Well, folks, I hope you got your picture. Like to follow me now.
Here's Mackinac Bridge.
Hello.
Wow, what a beauty.
Oh my gosh, I was slick.
Oh, you be careful. We're up in one of the towers at the fort, aren't we?
Yeah.
I bet.
And then, hi.
Around here, take a look at the fort. Here's the magazine shed. And Trent walking into a tree.
This is Fort Mackinac. We're on the island now. This is the fort that was built after they dismantled the fort over on the mainland, Fort Michela, Mackinac. It was built by the British during the American Revolution so that the American gunboats couldn't fire on the fort from up on the hill. Let me turn a little bit here. Shut the camera off first. Another shot up the very corner of the fort. I see people walking up the ramp. There's a long ramp to walk to get up to the fort. There it is. Now I'm going to turn. These are some of the... I don't know quite what they are yet. We just arrived on the island. They're some sort of homes. We'll have to discover what they are. Out looking over the marina. There's the lake. I'm going to get him standing on the sidewalk waiting for me. I think I saw a carriage go by. Yeah, there's one. We're going to plan on doing that later today. Take a tour around the island. Standing on the balcony of the governor's mansion. And I'm taking pictures out over the lake. See if I can see a little closer on that little lighthouse we passed on the boat coming in. See some of the houses and there's a transport coming in. I'm going to be facing into the sun here. Hope it doesn't ruin my picture. See some of the beauty of the place. It started this panorama, and then I went through the house for a tour. This is a golf course down below. I don't know whether this is the governor's golf course or if it belongs to. Oh, here's the bridge. And what you're seeing now is the Grand Hotel. Back up and find the bridge. There it is. The trainer children relaxing in the governor's hammock. Well, not all the trainer children. Now they're being piled in on top of each other. And the governor gave him permission. He said he doesn't mind. He prefers red.
I didn't hear him.
He prefers redheads. Okay, we have a gathering down there on the compound. There's a young man about ready to do a musket firing, it looks like. I'll try to get you around the inside of the fort here. See, what we see right here is the Soldiers Barracks. This fort ran from about 1780 to I think to about 1895, so it was quite a fort right here a long time. View of the lake. There's still some excavation going on here. You can see, if I can get you in there so you can see the cannon mount. Pan around the wall. You get a beautiful view of the lake from here. There's Todd into a building. There's the family. It's the West Block House they're going into. Mother, Dad, up over the top of the wall. There's the city of Mackinac Island below. Barge going through the straits. The siren you hear is the 12 o'clock siren, I would imagine. Time to break for lunch. You see the city of village of Mackinac Island down below. Kira doesn't want her picture taken today.
Hi, sweetie.
Tea room on the fort. Taking a break. To me, guys.
Kira.
Dad.
Kira. Oh, look at her hang on to Todd.
Is that drum a replica or is that an original?
This is a replica. The insignia on the front indicates that it's the 1st Regiment or the 1st Sub-Legion SL of the United States. Wayne was responsible for reorganizing the entire military system based on, patterned off of the Roman legions. And there were 4 sub-legions. We represent the 1st, and that's indicated by the white taping on our hats. And then the other 3 sub-legions had yellow, green, and red. So you'll notice that the shield on front has all 4 colors of all 4 legions.
I see.
great.
For a period of 13 years, the Americans and their young government were not strong enough to force the British into leaving. So the British stayed here for 13 years, reaped the harvest of the rich fur trade that was down below, until 1796, when the Americans finally forced them into leaving. This was upon the signing of Jay's Treaty. John Jay went over to England, signed a treaty with them, which the British finally agreed into leaving the fort. In 1796, they left here, went up to what is now Fort St. not a fort anymore, it was St. Joseph. It's up in Canada, and that's where the British would have been stationed when they left here. Americans came in, and they stayed here in the fort from 1796 until 1812. During that period, they did a lot of rearranging down inside the fort. I'll explain that to you as we go down onto the parade ground. But the Americans were here until 1812. Now this was the beginning of the War of 1812, ingeniously named. The War of 1812, the first major battle of the war, I can't really say battle, but engagement of the War of 1812 took place here on the island. The British were back up at Fort St. Joe. They had heard the war had been declared. They snuck up to the back of the island. They landed at what is now British Landing, and at nighttime they snuck up to the highest point on the island. They brought with them one 6-pound cannon, much like the 6-pounders on the upper gun platform back there. And in the morning time, they fired a warning shot, sent down a messenger, and demanded surrender of the fort. There were only 57 American troops inside the fort at that time. The commanding officer was named Lieutenant Porter Hanks. He was a young man, only about 20 years old. Porter Hanks looked up there on the hillside. He saw 300 British troops and another 600 Indians. So he not only feared for his troops' life, he knew that they could lob cannonballs into the fort and easily destroy it. He also feared for the people down in town, as he thought the Indians would go down and try to kill everyone in town. So he did the only thing he thought was possible, which was to surrender the fort back over to the British. So the Americans marched out down the ramp here, back onto their ships, and sailed back to Detroit. And at that time, the British once again came back into the fort. They controlled the fort here for a period of 3 years during that War of 1812. The first thing they did at that time was to fortify the highest point on the island back there from where they made their attack, and they named it Fort George after their king of the time. So, now during that 3-year period, the Americans made 3 attempts at retaking the fort. Their first attempt was a naval attack. They sailed in 5 battleships right down into Haldeman Bay down below here, pointed 32-pound cannons up at the walls, and fired a couple of rounds. They waited for the smoke to clear and expected to be able to march back up the ramp and retake the fort. But to their surprise, when the smoke quickly cleared away, the British were up here just waving and laughing at them as the balls landed in the side of the hill and simply rolled back down in the water. The Americans were unable to elevate their cannons high enough to get at the fort walls. So, the only damage they had done was to the post gardens down below. As the balls rolled back into the water, it messed up their crop for the year. But the walls, as you still see today, are still standing strong. And the British were up here just laughing at them. So the Americans sailed away and made their second plan of attack. This time they tried to duplicate the British sneak attack, but they kind of gave it away as they sailed around in front of the fort on the way to the back of the island. That gave it away a little bit and gave the British time to go back there and set up a defense. With the help of the fur traders and Indian friends down in town, they made a U-shaped defense back there, and when the Americans came ashore, they were severely beaten and sent back onto their ships. In that battle, 13 Americans died. One of them was named Andrew Hunter Holmes. Major Andrew Holmes died in that battle, and that's why the fort up there on the island is now called Fort Holmes after the major who died in that battle. The Americans renamed Fort George Fort Holmes. Sailing away, being defeated one more time, they made their third and final attempt at taking the fort. By now, it is the fall of 1814. The winter was setting in, and the British were running short on supplies. The Americans had cut off the British supply routes. All the supplies coming into the fort, hopefully trying to starve out the British. This was working very well. The winter was coming on, and the British were getting rather scared. They were running very low on their supplies, so they had to make a daring attempt at stopping the blockade. What they did was to load into bateaux. Now bateaux are big canoe-like boats that seat about 15 soldiers each. They snuck out to the American flagship at nighttime, snuck up alongside, boarded, and took over the American ship. With the code book, as that was the American flagship, they were able to raise the appropriate flags in the morning time to signal the other 2 ships to come up alongside. They did as ordered, and they were both boarded and taken over also, following the Americans' final attempt at taking the fort. But in 1815, upon the signing of the Treaty of Ghent, that signaled the end of the War of 1812. That treaty said all the land preceding the War of 1812 would be given back to its original owners. So at that time, the British had to leave here again, back up to Fort St. Joe, and the Americans came back in, and they stayed here inside the fort from 1815 then all the way up until 1895. There were American troops here inside the fort. At that time, the government pulled out the troops, restationed them elsewhere, and this became Michigan's first state park. Now, are there any questions so far I can answer about the history of the fort or anything? Quick questions now I can try to answer for you. To the North Blockhouse, and then it would run by gravity to the other buildings as it was called for. The North Blockhouse also was housing for some of the soldiers here. All the blockhouses, in fact, were used for housing at some time. They were also used for storage, and the East Blockhouse up here was used for a gunpowder magazine for a short time during the fort here. It was where the gunpowder was supplied, or stored, I should say, up there. And actually, one time the roof of that did catch on fire while the gunpowder was in.
Don't you frequent these rum shots, Sergeant?
Yes, he is under my command, sir, and I am aware of every man at every time.
Very well, continue.
Our search proved in vain. We did discover one of the company's bateau was missing. This we immediately reported.
How long did this search take you, Sergeant?
An hour and a half, sir.
It's quite a long time to search 2 rum shots, didn't you say?
There is more than 2, sir.
So which ones did we frequent, Sergeant?
Every one, sir.
That's just what I thought. And what was on the menu, Sergeant?
Sir, I have no idea.
Very well.
Most
You had
certainly.
no inclination Private Krieger was going to desert, did you?
Had I, sir, he would not have.
Very well, that'll be all. Thank you, Sergeant.
Thank you very much, sir.
Excuse me, Sergeant.
Yes, sir?
You said a company bateau was taken.
Yes, the company bateau was missing, sir.
You have reason to suspect Private Krieger, or did he take it?
I have found out recently, sir, that there was a lowly fisherman by the name of George Blair who has taken it.
I see.
Which will be returned. Yes, the man is held in the prison down in town.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Lieutenant?
That is all, Captain.
Thank you. If there's nothing further, then the prisoner may address the court.
I give myself to the mercy of this court. This is truly the blackest thing I ever did. My only excuse is the loneliness and isolation that come from being a private sentinel here at this secluded outpost. The winters are brutal up here. The snow piles up to our windows right there, and it blows right through the cracks in the walls. All we ever do is drill, walk these walls, cut firewood, haul water. There are no diversions from this except the occasional gill of rum or whiskey, and that ain't too much, Captain. In truth, though, it's the summer lights of this island that made me run. But we up here in the fort listen with envy to the fur traders and voyageurs that come to this island. They enjoy the long, hot summer days and festive celebration down in town, whooping it up all night long as we're walking the walls. And as autumn comes and winter sets in, they get to leave this island prison and go back to their homes in New York and Montreal and Boston. And we spend another long, grueling winter up here, walking the walls and cut more firewood. I'll take what punishment I may deserve. I look forward with great enthusiasm to the end of my 5-year enlistment here at this post.
Thank you, Private, for explaining the infinite variety of military life here at the fort. I think we're aware of that. If there's nothing further, then this court-martial stands adjourned until a proper verdict can be found.
The court deliberated on this matter for a period of 4 days, and on July 25th, 1797, they returned with their verdict.
All right. The court finds Private Henry Krieger guilty of the charge exhibited against him, it being a breach of Article 1, Section 6 of the Rules and Articles of War, and does sentence him to receive 100 lashes on his bare back. The Commandant approves the sentence and orders the punishment to take place tomorrow morning at the guard mounting. Take the prisoner away.
We had 2 on top of each other. Two in circle on top, two in circle on the bottom. One blanket every 3 years. They had to last them.
And now for something a little bit lighter, the men might have pushed the tables to one side in the mess hall and invited some of the ladies up from town, and dances would have been played. I'd like to play for you a popular Scottish-Irish folk tune called the Gary Owen. Now the drummer will play a long roll, which we'll call the assembly. And I will be playing a tune called To Arms, which was a fight tune of the period used to assemble the men. As you can see, it still works today.
These weapons for you. Let me introduce the rest of the tour guides and tell you about the uniforms that we're wearing. Down on the end there is George. You met the musicians Dave and Gordon. My name is John, and to my left is Jay. Now, if you have any questions during your stay here inside the fort, please feel free to ask any one of us. We would be more than happy to answer them for you. The uniforms that we're wearing represent the first Americans ever to come into the fort, and that was in the year 1796. Now, those men were members of Wayne's Legion, and they were all under the control of General Mad Anthony Wayne. At that time, the American military was divided into 4 equal sub-legions. They had the identical uniforms except for a distinguishing brim on their hat. We have a white brim, which meant we were members of the 1st sub-legion. The rest of the uniform did consist of the black felt hat, topped off with bear fur, and pinned up on the left side with a leather cockade. In the center of that cockade is a silver eagle insignia. The eagles are also on our buttons, and this is believed to be the first time an eagle was used on the United States military uniform. Our coats we have on are woolen fatigue coatee. They're 100% wool and quite cool and comfortable on hot days like today. They're not quite warm enough during the winter months, and this is the everyday work uniform of the soldier. He was expected to wear it whether he was working in the gardens down below, maybe chopping wood on a neighboring island, or drilling up and down the parade grounds. This is his everyday work uniform. Underneath this is a white unbleached muslin shirt tied up at the neck with a black neck stock. We have on white linen pants. These are the summer issue pants. In the wintertime, we'd be issued blue woolen pants. Black leather shoes, and because the 3 of us will be firing muskets today, we have on the appropriate cross belts. On the right-hand side is the cartridge box containing the charges needed to load and fire the weapons for you today. On the left-hand side is the bayonet scabbard containing an 18-inch triangular-shaped socket-style bayonet. It is easily affixed to the end of the musket and turns it into a deadly 6.5-foot long spear that could be thrust at an opponent and would inflict a very deadly triangular-shaped wound. Because of its triangular shape, the wound would be very hard to heal. And for that reason, many of the men bled to death out on the battlefield. It said more men died from the wounds of bayonets than all musket and cannon fire combined during the American Revolution and the War of 1812. With that, I'll turn it over to George. He'll tell you about the muskets that we'll be firing.
The muskets are 69 caliber. They're smoothbore flintlock muskets, originally made in France at the Charleville Musket Works and called Charlevilles. They were imported for the American armies during the American Revolution, and then once it ended, they were stockpiled and used right through the year 1800 by our military. So even in 1796, here at Fort Mackinac, under Major Henry Burbick, this Charleville was still one of the basic weapons of the American military. Like all muskets, it has three main parts: the locker firing mechanism on the right here, the wooden stock, and the metal barrel, which goes together to produce an old saying, lock, stock, and barrel, that comes from the musket. If you had the three parts, you had everything that you needed: lock, stock, and barrel. To make it operate, fold the cock into the full cock position and place a priming charge of gunpowder in the flash pad and move the metal frizzen down on top. Pulling the trigger, this flintstone will knock open that metal plate. Flint and metal create sparks, and those will ignite the priming charge here, which will burst into smoke and flame, and part of the flame will shoot through a tiny hole here in the breech of the barrel, called the touch hole, and that will in turn ignite the main charge that will ram into the barrel itself. That's a big pile of words to describe something we do in 15 seconds. Every infantryman was expected to load and fire one of these weapons once every 15 seconds, 4 times a minute. Though the rifle of the day was much more accurate, unfortunately the rifle took 1 minute to load and fire just one time because the loading procedure was far more complicated. But this could be loaded 4 times in that minute and made it much more practical on a battlefield. To begin the loading, we'll pull the cock into the safety position and cannot fire in this position. Don't go off half cock. Another old-fashioned saying: if it did, then we're in for a serious accident here during the loading. We're also going to use a guard here on the frizzen. It's a leather patch to make sure we don't get a shower of sparks before we want them. And now, reaching into our cartridge box, we pull out a paper cartridge that makes it possible to load and fire this weapon 4 times a minute. Everything we need is right here. A musket ball would be in the base where our fingers are if we were using them today, and on top of that would be about 70 grains of gunpowder. Now what we're going to do is tear off the top with our teeth to get to the priming charge. That makes teeth essential to the American military. If you wanted to join the Continental Armies, you had to have 4 of them in your face, and they did hope they lined up on one side so you could tear open the paper cartridge. And if you couldn't pass that test, they made you the musician. Pouring the rest on the barrel, you see where the musket ball ends up on top, and the paper is the waddy. Everything else is rammed into the breech, and it's ready for firing. It'll go off 80% of the time. 20% of the time, we're going to have misfires. And in heavy, rainy weather, these are useless because the gunpowder dissolves in water and you can't use your muskets or cannons. So battles sometimes would halt for a few minutes during a real heavy rain because you could not ignite your gunpowder. Afterwards, with a lighter rain, they went back to firing at one another on the battlefield. We're going to go to my right, and Jay's going to call out the commands for firing, but before we do, if you're going to take a picture of this historic 18th century American event on your Fuji film, what we suggest here at Fort Mackinac is to please put your finger lightly on the shutter button and wait until the muskets go off, because that will make you take the perfect picture. Don't anticipate Jay's call because we could have 3 misfires. It's a very boring picture of us in funny hats holding all of this wood and metal. But with your finger lightly on the shutter button and the musket going off, you're going to jump a tear, strike the shutter button, and take a perfect picture of the one that you wanted. And those of you who have little ones, cover their ears up because these are really loud and they tend to scream, embed themselves in the ceiling of the forge and all kinds of things.
As in the 18th century, the soldiers lined up in lines known as ranks. There'd be anywhere from 100 to 150 men in each rank. First rank would shoot off their volley. While they started to reload, the second rank would run through and shoot off theirs. They'd begin to reload. By that time, the first rank would be done. They'd run through. So you get this leapfrogging effect on the battlefield. Both armies moving towards one another until they didn't have enough time to load their muskets anymore. That's when they'd affix the bayonets and go into hand-to-hand combat. But before that time, they would respond to these commands. Go, Carlock! Boys, Carlock! Full cock, Carlock! Please clear the hillside!
Did you want
folks on the end of the playground, please move up to the left. Take aim! Move! Return rammer. Please clear the hillside. For those of you that missed that first round, or possibly took a picture of the ceiling of the porch, this is your last chance.
What did he say?
Be out of your direction, Boys, firelock. Full cock, firelock. Take aim. Move.
What you doing, Todd? Making cornmeal. Good job.
And you'd
No,
stick
I am not.
the ball through this way. And then you move them down so that now the blue ones are down on the bottom and the yellow ones are on the top. And then you just push down. And then you just keep going back and forth. Like you just go through this way. And you put the iron all the way through and pull it. And then when you move them up like this, you pull down and it weaves it through. So you just keep going back and forth. And eventually, if you go in the other room, on the table in there, there's a long table runner. That's what this is, but on a larger scale. This one's just a really, really thin one. So you can hardly tell the weaving on it. But when you look at the bigger ones, you can see, like you can make it through this whole thing, and it'll make something about this thick.
You say that's called a stick loom?
A tape loom.
A tape loom.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Okay, you guys, tell me what you're doing.
Turn the fan that guy's got in there.
To do what?
Make the fire hot. Bring the air up and make the fire hot.
To do what?
It brings the air up and it makes the fire hot.
Uh-huh. Who uses it? What's his name?
Benjamin the blacksmith.
Okay. What's he burn?
Steel.
Coal.
Steel.
Huh.
This is Mackinac down the main, looking down the main street. Pan over across. Now you see the fort. Got it from the yard, but this is a little wider panoramic view. Some of the homes along this street as well are just magnificent looking.
See, what happens here, as I said before, is you wind your wool off your wheel onto here, and as it goes around, it turns this crank right here. So, you might get bored, you might want to do a little singing, so you might sing, round and round the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel, monkey thought was all in fun, and off goes the weasel.
That's great. And you say that shows when a skein has been wound around.
Yes, it's a skein.
That's terrific.
So that's 60 turns.
Wow. Okay. Okay, you want to move a minute? Get the wool where she's been carding.
Yes, but don't.
The kitchen and the Indian dormitory.
So Dr. Daniel Musser, I want
$1,000. The hotel does have 275 rooms. Rooms there will cost anywhere from $100 to $160 per night per person. The hotel is made entirely out of white Michigan pine, which is a state tree. Dinners at the Grand will cost $30 for a buffet-style dinner and $18 for a buffet-style lunch. If you do happen to eat lunch at the Grand Hotel, they will graciously refund your $3 admission charge into the lobby.
Hi, guys.
Hi,
Everybody's tired. We're having fun.
Where's Dad? There's Dad. Okay, guys.
This is a spot called Arch Rock.
We might be kind of close.
I don't know if this
Can you get it in there?
videotape will do it justice or not. It is gorgeous view through there.
There. Watch it back. I'll show you.
Get a different angle at it from here.
Oh, look at you. Isn't that pretty?
See if I can find my family over there
Look at how he works.
taking pictures. Get you a view of this side of the lake.
Yeah. Stop it.
On the back side of the island. The horizon. Mighty big lake. Get a view of the road going all the way around the island. As the driver said, it goes all the way around the island. It's only road that's never had an automobile accident.
The only one that never ends, too.
Yeah, goes in a complete circle. You can tell from this we're up pretty high.
This is the unpopulated side of the island, it looks like.
Right.
If we go down, we'd be
It's
dead.
about 2,200 acres on the island, 1,700 of which is a state park owned by the State Park of Michigan.
I can't see
federal.
the other end of the hole.
Our carriage, or part of our tour. I forget the three horses' names.
Kelly, move.
Well.
Okay, I want to take a picture of the kids.
My family's still taking pictures of Arch Rock. Overlooking the Grand Hotel. I'm going to be panning into the sun here.
Can you walk in front of it? I don't know if you walk.
You've got a son?
Some pictures into the sun. We got here too late to walk in front of it. There's a dress code that goes into effect at 6 o'clock. It's about 6:30 right now. So we'll just have to be content to
Park over here, Richard.
Run over here, Richard.
carriage going in. Just got the tail end of it. Okay, I'm back down the walkaways now. I get a pretty good look. It's supposedly the longest porch on any hotel in the world. I'll pan back here a little bit. get a full shot of it. Then I'll zoom in as far as I can get. So look, it's quite a magnificent place. Rather exclusive. Sun's going to be bothering my lens, I'm sure. Looks good through the viewfinder though. One more pan back. We get a look at the whole hotel. When I make my first million, I'll come back and we'll all stay. This is the governor's mansion that we toured this morning. I took some videotape from the governor's mansion. Now I'm standing by the road down from the Grand Hotel, getting a shot at the governor's mansion. You can see part of the fort there too. Give you an idea how far away I actually am. I'll pan back from it. Going away. Carriage from the Grand Hotel. The little stone church that was built. Everything was built with the material off the island except for the stained glass windows. I'm gonna pan up and give you one last view of that panorama. So pretty.
Tell the camera you're in the boat.
We're on Shepler's ship.
Wyandotte.
We're looking at the shoreline of Mackinac.
Saw that place that you were saying. The big, massive ship over there sitting over there in the water. Oh, you're gonna get right in close here. On a boat, St. Marie River in Sault Ste. Marie, looking over at Canada right at the moment. Just starting out on a 2-hour boat tour. I'll tell you more later. Now on the upper deck of our boat, not looking out the window any longer. It's an Army Corps.
Large derrick on the other side of the pier to our left.
Engineers.
It lifts the gates of the American locks whenever they need repairs. It is capable of lifting 250 tons. Appropriately named Paul Bunyan.
Looking up towards the locks.
Lower approach to the
You see the bridge that goes across. Kind of cloudy today.
Locks are numbered 1 through 4 from left to right.
All the way across to Canada.
Lock opened in 1943. Named for MacArthur after General Douglas MacArthur. It is 800 feet long, 80 feet wide, 31.
We're starting to pass through a lock right at the moment. Okay, we're into the lock. I'm not quite sure. I think this is the whole lock. I'm not sure. Zoom ahead. See what's coming. Gates are still shut. The water is coming up. Don't know if you'll be able to see it. The water is definitely rising.
Charts and photographs, all in full color. One of the photos is of the vessel you are now on, the Comas. These guidebooks sell for $3 and can be purchased from Uncle Clark, the ship's decking. If anyone who purchases the book would like to have the captain or crew sign their book, please feel free to bring it up to the lighthouse at any time.
Bridge from Sault Ste. Marie. We're closer this time. Blue side of it. We'll be up the top of the dock here. I'm not moving the camera. Here are the passengers on our ship.
Sault tour guides.
Go back to my focal point of the bridge, and I'm not moving the camera. It's just that we're rising up in the lock.
Sault tour guides.
You can tell now we're coming right up. Now I can see more of the bridge that goes into Canada. There we go. Just keep coming up and up and up. We can see the entire bridge now. See how much the water has risen since I was there last. Okay, we're still on the same lock. You can see the water's now very high to the top. And in a few minutes those gates will be opened up. And we'll go right on through.
The largest percentage of this freight is taconite iron ore.
Okay, we're almost right at the very top now. Locks will be opening up momentarily. Goes the gate up.
The level of the water is 21 feet lower than the level that we are now on.
We have risen 21 feet to go from Lake Huron into Lake Superior. This is a little shaky. It's because the ship just started to move and I got jostled a little bit. We're now moving right forward. Go right through the lock. Oh, they picked up the sound of that horn. I jumped. When I heard it, I wasn't expecting it. Seagulls in front of us in the lock.
Fishing. They're fishing.
Mom says they're fishing.
You see them dip down and get a fish?
see that we're moving. I'm going to show you the last of that bridge as far as I can see it. Back in the horizon is Canada.
Freighter over to the left. That big freighter out there to the left.
Drop here on, huh?
Now the bridge is back home.
Did it come down? Yeah.
Well out of the locks by now. We're heading up a little north and mostly west on the St. Mary's River. And off to my right there, yes, is a size freighter being led in by a tug. Away from that freighter, this is the last shot I'm going to be able to get of it. This is a Canadian steel mill. We're sailing in Canadian waters right at the moment. Locks are opening up on the gate. The gentleman said there's 8.5 million gallons of water dropped to lower us 21 feet.
How are we gonna fit through there?
Lake Huron, water level